And that, of course, is the unjustified tariffs placed on Canada by United States President Donald Trump. To be clear, the tariff situation we're facing right now with the United States is unacceptable. As I speak, our country stands at a once-in-a-generation crossroads. At the same time, we're experiencing unprecedented consensus among Canadians nationwide that we cannot squander. But we cannot take a decade to get this done. We need a 1 year to yes policy, 1 year from proposal to permit. No more death by delay. And we can't stop there. We need more bold nation-building ideas and pipeline projects to get our energy products to our provincial partners and global allies. We cannot let Canada continue to be managed into mediocrity. We must take action to strengthen our country and create lasting prosperity for generations to come. And that means building up our military to ensure we can defend our sovereignty, meet our NATO obligations, and hold the line in the Arctic and abroad. And that means finding new trading partners, which is why I'm also headed to Japan and South Korea later this month. Everyone knows that this is a really important election, and I think that Pierre Poilievre, quite frankly, is the one with the credibility to take us there. So if you can, anything you can do to help get him over the finish line, I think that now's the time. If we want to compete and win in the next generation, it should go without saying, but let me say it. Canada is worth fighting for. But there are immediate actions that we have to take. Yes. There are immediate actions we have to take to ensure that Canada is a strong, prosperous, and independent nation. Canada must be a nation that defends itself, that builds things, that cares for its people, particularly its most vulnerable, that powers itself, that trades with the world, that invests in the future and wins. Unfortunately, for too long, Canada has drifted. We've coasted on past accomplishments, relying on the strength of our neighbors and the goodwill of our allies. We've been complacent while the rest of the world has gotten faster and more competitive. And today we face a new threat, one that has awoken us from our slumber and forced us to take a very long and hard look in the mirror. And that, of course, is the unjustified tariffs placed on Canada by United States President Donald Trump. To be clear, the tariff situation we're facing right now with the United States is unacceptable. One hard lesson that we have learned from this unfortunate experience is that we have to do more to build our nation right here at home. As I speak, our country stands at a once-in-a-generation crossroads. At the same time, we're experiencing unprecedented consensus among Canadians nationwide that we cannot squander. Just last week, Nanos polling showed that 77% of Canadians now support building a new west-to-east pipeline. Yeah. So, what do we do now? How do we meet the moment? And the answer is simple. We build, and we build fast, and we build big, and we build now. As Canadians, the answers to the challenges lie right beneath our feet. For example, for years, we have drastically undersold the opportunity that we have at the Port of Prince Rupert in British Columbia. I tend to think of that as Alberta's port, but it could be Saskatchewan and Manitoba and Ontario's port too. This is Canada's gateway to Asia, and how we secure new markets, lessen our dependence on the United States, and export everything from food to fuel to critical minerals. But to unlock its full potential, we must twin rail lines. We have to build inland ports and logistics hubs. We have to expand port infrastructure. And we have to secure long-term labor stability. And if we do, we also can unlock Ontario's Ring of Fire, which is one of the world's richest deposits of critical minerals, and finally get them to global markets, and in particular to Asia. But we cannot take a decade to get this done. We need a 1 year to yes policy, 1 year from proposal to permit. No more death by delay. And we can't stop there. We need more bold nation-building ideas and pipeline projects to get our energy products to our provincial partners and global allies. Projects that go north to Grays Bay in Nunavut, east to Churchill in Manitoba, and a needed pipeline to the west coast, and yes, of course, a modern version of Energy East. We also need to buy more from each other. That means breaking down interprovincial trade barriers that have hampered our economy for decades and killed countless jobs and opportunities. And that's why I'm out east this week. Yesterday and today, I met with business leaders in Montreal to explore greater trade opportunities between Quebec and Alberta. And that's why I'm also here in Ottawa, so that we can look to expand our trade with the province of Ontario. In Alberta, we're far too familiar with how interprovincial trade disputes can get in the way of nation building and economic sovereignty. We've seen NDP and Liberal provinces and politicians block important energy projects like Northern Gateway and like Energy East. These are projects that would have helped us get more of our energy products to our provincial friends and our global allies and made us less reliant on a single trading partner. This pattern of obstructionism has been devastating to our economy, and it has to stop once and for all. Today, there is a desire to get this work done like never before, but none of it is possible if the federal government continues to cling to bad economic policies and reckless ideological ideas. Everyday working Canadians have had enough of bad policies and bad ideas from Ottawa that only serve to make us weaker and weaker and weaker. Enough with their meaningless, virtue-signaling, extreme climate policies that only serve to make Canadians poorer, threaten our energy security, kill jobs and investment across the country, and make us vulnerable to unpredictable trade winds. These policies are not progressive. They're the very opposite. They're regressive. They take us backward, not forward. We cannot let Canada continue to be managed into mediocrity. We must take action to strengthen our country and create lasting prosperity for generations to come. That means building pipelines and ports and power grids, not just writing press releases about them. That means developing our resources, oil, gas, uranium, potash, agriculture, and yes, critical minerals, because global security depends on Canadian production. And that means competing in the AI race, not regulating ourselves into irrelevance. And that means building up our military to ensure we can defend our sovereignty, meet our NATO obligations, and hold the line in the Arctic and abroad. And that means finding new trading partners, which is why I'm also headed to Japan and South Korea later this month to make the case for Canada and Alberta exports. Canada cannot afford to be weak, not now and not ever. It is time for us to grow up and start acting like a strong, independent, and sovereign nation that we know and love. Just like when Sir John A. Macdonald built the Canadian Pacific Railway to unite a young Canada, we too must once again focus on new nation-building projects that unite our country and secure our future. And Canadians will always, always, always rise to the challenge. We are builders, we are innovators, we are patriots. So every Canadian watching what's happening today, let me say this: there is a better path. The choice is ours. We can be weak or we can be worthy. We can be divided or we can be determined. We can be complacent or we can be strong and free. I choose strong and free. How about you? Hey, friend.
That was a bit of a rah-rah Canada speech there. I heard you didn't like us anymore.
I showed Brian my latest manicure. I got red painted toenails. I told him I'm Team Canada right down to my toes.
So that was an inspiring speech for what the future of Canada holds. Pierre Poilievre's out there campaigning right now, not to turn this into partisan, although it's a conservative audience, but he's saying we could be the richest nation on earth.
Yeah.
How much do you think, as you talked about all those projects, we know that we're about 20% per capita lower than the US in terms of our per capita GDP.
Yeah.
Would we be wealthier than the Americans if we did the things you were talking about there?
I think there's no doubt about it. When you look at the value proposition that we have to the Americans, so much of it is that we have all of the critical minerals, all the raw resources that they need to turn into value-added products. And so if we take a view of Fortress North America, and I include Mexico in that there really is nothing that we can't do together. So I would say that whether we build out our own prosperity by continuing to rely on our traditional trading partners, whether we tear down the trade barriers and start trading more with each other, whether we find new markets, or all three.
I'd say all three.
No question in my mind that we'd be able to bridge that gap very quickly.
In terms of refining capability, right now we ship south because of a lack of other alternatives, but we also have not increased refining capability. Is that something that you're working on as Premier to get more refineries in Alberta, or does it just make more sense to ship it to Asia, to ship it to the United States?
Well, I think we need to do more processing, generally speaking. I mean, one of the things that I think we should be alarmed by about China's dominance in critical minerals is that they really have locked up not only the raw materials but also the processing capability. And part of the reason is that they've subsidized it so heavily that they've made it uneconomic in our countries to do that kind of processing. But we have to invest in that, because otherwise we'll be completely dependent on Chinese supply chains for some of these critical minerals. So I think we have a big opportunity there. What we've learned when it comes to refining is that it makes the most sense to refine closest to the market where your product is going to. So it makes sense for Alberta to produce it, but it makes more sense for Sarnia to refine it, or for refineries in Quebec to be able to refine it. So it could well be that if we can find a pathway to an energy east, whether for oil or
more refineries in Canada, but not necessarily in Alberta.
Yeah, I would say that that's again the value proposition that we have. If we can develop it in Alberta, put pipeline in the ground using Quebec and Ontario steel, and then be able to have refining capacity closer to the market on the East Coast, that's probably the best way that we can leverage our respective strengths.
You spent a lot of time talking to the other premiers the last while, either on First Minister's calls with the Prime Minister or just cough. You guys have been meeting nonstop. It's insane. What is the feeling that you're getting from your fellow Prime Ministers? I know Francois Legault of Quebec was less than enthusiastic, you might say, about pipelines. Is he coming around? Is he softening? Are some of the other premiers saying, you know what, given what's happening, this is what we have to do? We
commissioned a poll, and we asked the question about pipelines in every province. And then we sent the results to every premier, including Francois Legault. And he'll tell you that every single time I have met him from the first day, I talked to Quebec about developing their own substantial natural gas resources, and they should. And that we would be able to help develop the regulatory environment, assist them with their royalty framework, help them with the technology. They also have potential for pore space, so they could sequester the CO2. They could get economic sovereignty, because right now Quebec gets all of its gas from the United States. And they could also help their friends internationally by being able to export into Europe. So I think there's a great value proposition. What I think we need to do, and why I'm getting more involved, is let's find out some of the barriers to why we face challenges in those projects in the past. And one of the things that I've been told by the community is that trying to get more pipeline built right through Montreal is probably the most difficult place to do it. Is there another way that you could build around Montreal to the north? Could you go even further north, so that you're able to go into zones that are welcoming of pipeline projects? So I think that you have to find out what it is that the objections are, and then just work with the community to try to address those. I think maybe in the past we took for granted that when we put these projects forward that they would just get approved. I think we've learned our lesson now, and I'm prepared to do what it takes to be able to get that social acceptability.
Yeah, you can't go just north of Montreal. That's literally the Laurentians' cottage area, where the Laurentian elite after cottages.
A little further north.
Yeah, you got to go further north than that. You've been taking a lot of hits lately for your attempts to lobby down stateside, though. And I have not understood it. In fact, I've been joking that the reason I got invited to come do this was I'm the only Eastern Canadian journalist not to have called Premier Smith a traitor. I find it abhorrent that you were called a traitor, because for as long as I met you 15 years ago, you were in public service then. Yeah. You were in the media speaking up for Canada. You're in public service now. How did it feel to have people with big names and national platforms using a word like that for you?
I didn't notice. Was there negative coverage? I actually get so many positive people coming up to me when I'm in the airports or when I'm in my home province. I guess the way I look at it is that you have to meet people where they are. I believe in diplomacy. I guess that's the difference. You can have a good cop, bad cop approach. I prefer to be the good cop. I know that this is a 100-year-plus relationship that we have with the Americans. It's going to persist for 100-plus years longer, and we have to make sure that we still have a relationship after this skirmish. Sometimes when you have the kind of integrated economies we do, there's going to be irritants. But if you don't keep the lines of communication open, then I think it has the potential to really get out of control. And I want to just make sure that we constantly have a relationship with the United States. I want to make sure that the influencers in the United States, the ones that we know are allies, like Ben Shapiro, when he goes on to his platform and he says that tariffs are a terrible thing, that has a lot of weight to it, and I think it's very influential. That's the reason why I do it, is we find our friends and allies in the United States who will make the argument to Americans in a way that we can't, and then hopefully be able to change hearts and minds down there in the administration.
Yeah, Ben has long been an ally of Canada. I spoke to Breitbart Radio a little while ago as well, and there are people there who get it. Joe Rogan. So talking actually gets results. Imagine that.
Yeah. So, can I tell you one of the things that I did tell them when I went down is, I know that the president likes to talk about President McKinley as sort of his model for why tariffs, in his view, works. But if you go back and look at the rest of the story there, in 1890, before McKinley got into the presidency, he brought through his major tariff reform. And then in the 2 years following, in the midterms, there was almost a 100% reversal in the House of Representatives. So they lost 96 seats and the Democrats gained 96 seats. And so that was my warning to them, is that you have to look at what the downstream consequences are of the decisions. And we're already seeing it. We're seeing it in the stock market. We're hearing it with the stories that are being told by various members of the public who are selling, or various businesses who are trying to sell their product to the public. And those are the voices that are ultimately, I think, going to turn the tide. And so the question will be, do the Americans learn the lesson of what tariffs actually do to their country and the global economy early and switch course? And I think you have to keep on making those arguments to be able to get that reversal.
Well, I'm sure it hasn't escaped your notice that oil is down, what is it, 20% in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah.
What kind of impact is that for Alberta, if it stays there?
Oh, massive. I mean, we had already anticipated, we need about a $74 WTI for our budget to balance. And so we had to estimate that this year it might average 68 with a very large differential of about $17. And that in alone would give us a $5 billion deficit. So you can imagine that these prices persisting would be far worse. I mean, we've seen this before. We've had differentials as high as $30.
$30 between WTI Western Texas and
Western Canada Select. So, but we've also had massive deficits in the past, and so yeah, we're not. I mean, we want to see some stability return. We want to see some stability return to oil pricing, some stability return to the global economy. But there's no question that everyone is hurt by this tariff war.
You mentioned Grays Bay.
Yeah.
Not many people talk about Grays Bay, and I remember first time I heard it was from a person in the Biden administration complaining that we just wouldn't get it done. Fill people in on these ports that we're looking to build in the north and why they're so important. You kind of brushed over them in the speech.
Well, there's a few. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed with the premiers is increasingly we meet as a Western Premiers Group as well as with our National Premiers Group, and we've been identifying with different ports that if we could build them out and then work backwards on building out the infrastructure, that we would benefit. And so Nunavut and Northwest Territories have identified Grays Bay. So most of the track would go up through the Northwest Territories and then come over into Nunavut. And then it would be a deep water port right there, which is, it may not be able to be a year-round port, but now you have created the conditions for building icebreakers, which help Quebec and British Columbia, which also would be able to, which are in the shipbuilding business. It would allow us to be able to put potentially another NORAD joint base in that same area so that we could have some Arctic security. It would also then allow us to start building out the infrastructure, whether it's highways or rail lines or pipelines, so that we would be able to get more of the critical minerals and other products exported off our northern coast that could then come around to Europe. So that, to me, is a way to unlock our north. We have the way to unlock more of our product to the West Coast as well. There's at least 3 different pathways to be able to get pipelines built to the West Coast, but Port of Prince Rupert is absolutely going to be the most important port, in my view, on the West Coast. It has the ability for us to expand and also be able to accommodate all of the different types of products to be exported there. You've seen...
Is there potential for LNG at Rupert?
Well, certainly. I mean, there is potential. I think Port of Prince Rupert right now exports a lot of propane, so it's a lot of propane going to Japan and South Korea comes out of Port of Prince Rupert. But we also have, of course, the ability to expand Coastal GasLink. So LNG Canada 1 could expand, get LNG 2. There's at least 4 or 5 other LNG projects. In fact, Francois Poilievre from TC Energy, he gave a major speech to the Canadian Club today, saying that Canada should aspire to be the largest LNG exporting nation in the world based on our opportunity on the West Coast. We just did a reserve study for Alberta alone and discovered that we've got the potential for 1.4 quadrillion cubic feet of gas, and British Columbia has an equivalent resource. So that gives you an idea. It's practically inexhaustible.
Quadrillion?
Quadrillion.
I don't even know that number.
It's a big number. There's a lot of zeros behind it.
Anybody know that number? Any accountants here? That is absolutely
it's huge.
Unreal.
And we also have 1.8 billion or trillion. What am I have to look at Mike. Is it 1.8 trillion barrels of oil as well. And so we've got a massive resource in Alberta that, as long as we continue developing the technology, we can continue to develop the resource.
The argument for becoming the world's biggest exporter of LNG is lowering global emissions. Mm-hmm. That's something that some politicians that were not successful in past federal elections have put forward. I don't get the sense that if the Liberals win, that they're going to suddenly embrace this idea that they said there was no business case for. How do you break through on that with people that are just committed to telling you that your province should leave, what is it, 50 or is it 80% in the ground?
Probably more. I would say that there's been a change, and this is, I think, what I hope will persist. We'll see what happens on the election on April the 28th, but there has been a change among the premiers in realizing that we have to support one another. I think the threat from the United States is one that is existential for some provinces, and maybe existential for the country if you hear some voices, and that's why we've realized that Canada is an act of will, and if we want to survive and be stronger, we're stronger together, and we have to support each other. And so I think that has been a reversal in the thinking from the past 4 months, because I think we always took it for granted that we'd always have that free access to the U.S. market going north-south, and we didn't have to worry about trading east-west. I would say that's over, and that is also a lesson from history. After the 1890 tariffs, sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Is Canada looked to trade more with Britain, and so we ended up increasing our trade ties with our European allies. And I suspect you're going to see the same on both sides, that both increasing our access to markets in Asia as well as increasing our access to markets in Europe. And I don't think that is going to change. It just is a matter of how quickly can we get there. Because I can tell you, again, when we built the Trans-Canada main line, it took 2 years to do. And now it takes 10 years to get a permit. So that's what's going to have to change. How is it that we were able to build massive infrastructure projects in a year or 2 or 3, 100 years ago, and yet we can't even get through a regulatory process in that same amount of time? And that, I think, has got to be the active will on the part of all the governments to address that. Well,
at least the two that are viable contenders for winning are both saying that they will reduce permit times. Different strategies, but at least they're both saying that. Moving out to other markets, for you it would be more towards Asia, for Eastern Canada towards Europe. How easy is it for you to get people in business in your province to look elsewhere? Because the free trade deals are already there. Mm-hmm. We just haven't taken advantage of them. We're still in TPP, or whatever they changed the name of it to. We've got the European Union trade agreement, unfortunately not quite one there with Britain yet. So how tough is it to get people to say, look over that way as opposed to, well, I can just look south and it's easy?
I think proximity is always going to be the determinant of who your strongest trade partner is, because when you have lower transportation costs, it just makes you more competitive. But that being said, I think what we have to do is ensure that we've got a functioning infrastructure that leads from, whether it's rail onto the ports or whether it's transportation by truck. We don't have those efficiencies right now. You can't load up a load in Port of Vancouver and drive it seamlessly across the country without running into provincial trade barriers that have different rules for different weights and different axles and different color flags. Like, that is a problem that we've got to solve. We also have to, quite frankly, have a conversation with our unions. We have had how many port strikes, east and west? How many rail strikes and threats, east and west? How many airline strikes with both of our major airlines? And that is the kind of thing we're shooting ourselves in the foot in trying to find those international markets. If companies cannot have the certainty that when they deliver something to a terminal that it's going to get delivered, or internationally that when something gets delivered to a port that they're not going to be sitting out in the water for days or weeks or months, that is going to be a real challenge for the next federal government, is to sort that out, because that is, I think, what, if we can open up those kind of trade lines, then that is what's going to create that certainty and that opportunity.
We've only got a couple of minutes left, so one quick question on beef, and then I'll get you to wrap up. I've never understood why Canadian beef isn't sold around the world as Canadian beef. A lot of what we produce ends up in American slaughterhouses. It shows up as product of America. Is now the time, and you've got a lot of ranchers in your province, is now the time to make the world say, oh, Canadian beef or Alberta beef, that's the best stuff, I got to get it, instead of Australian or Japanese, what have you?
I think there always is that opportunity. I mean, I don't know about you, I've doubled my beef consumption. Yeah. I truly, I have half a cow being delivered on Sunday. I can hardly wait. I'm sure, yeah, it's going to be some heavy beef happening over the course of the next year. But we do also, this is, I guess, one of the issues that we have as a country, really, is that we have been accustomed to providing the raw materials, and that includes cattle and grain, and then it gets upgraded in the United States. So it would take some effort for us to develop those new trade lines. That's why I'm saying that it's got to be all of the above. We've got to maintain a strong relationship with our U.S. counterparts, and quite frankly, at the moment, it looks like we're going to have an early renegotiation of the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. That is positive. I haven't heard the U.S. president say anything about stopping beef going across the border, so maybe the message has gotten through there. But if you look at as well the opportunity that we have in Asia, I think this will be a good conversation for you to have with Scott Moe tomorrow. Scott has done an incredible amount of work of getting product into the international markets. I think he said that he is one of the least dependent on North-South trade, that he has far more of his product going internationally than any other province. And it's because of the fact that he does international trade missions, that they do have offices internationally, as do we. And I think that there's a real model for us to continue doing that. So whether it's going to be our beef or our pork or our canola or other grain products, I really believe that now is the time for us to take advantage of those trade partnerships. The world does want to have more Canadian product. You may have heard a former prime minister say that there's no business case. When people come knock on our doors, say, do you want to trade with us? Well, there is a business case, but it's going to be up to each of the provinces, I think, to go out and do those kinds of missions, bring the business community along with them, and for us to just realize that we are a pretty special place. We have everything that the world wants, and we've got to go out there and make sure that they know that we're prepared to do trade with them.
Last word to the audience. You said Canada's worth fighting for. What can everyone here do to fight for Canada?
Yeah, why are we still here? Why aren't we all at our door knocking, right? I think that the main thing is hold politicians to their promises. We're hearing a lot of promises during this election campaign. I think we all know you're not going to be surprised who I'm voting for, but we're hearing a lot of promises coming from other political parties because they're trying to capture the mood. The mood right now is to be on Team Canada. The mood right now is to fight for Canada. And I think after the election is over, we've got to make sure that there isn't any regression, that there isn't any of, oh, I told you that just to get elected and now we're not going to act on it. We have to act on it. This is our time, and it's a very narrow window to be able to lock in, I think, on this national consensus. And so just make sure that you're making the phone calls, especially to your friends in Ontario and Quebec. For those of you who are from Alberta, I know that they've got an Alberta corner here, but make sure everyone knows that this is a really important election. And I think that Pierre Poilievre, quite frankly, is the one with the credibility to take us there. So if you can, anything you can do to help get him over the finish line, I think that now's the time.